down and punish those responsible for these cowardly acts.
11 minutes later, a plane slams into the Pentagon, the nation's capital under attack. At 9:50, a shocking sight. One of the World Trade Towers collapses. 110 floors of steel and glass crash down in downtown Manhattan. At 10:30, the second tower crashes to the ground, possibly thousands of people dead. At the same time, another hijacked plane crashes in Pennsylvania. The question tonight, who's responsible for the attack on the U.S.?
13 News now brings you continuing coverage of the attack on the U.S.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Sandra Cole.
And I'm Jack Kane. On a day that will live on in infamy, an almost inconceivable attack on the U.S.
Tonight, the nation is on high alert. That includes airports, chemical plants, and government offices locally. Hundreds swarm local Red Cross offices to donate much-needed blood to the thousands of injured. And a nation in shock. Everyone seems to ask the same question everywhere you go. How could this happen? Our 13 News continuing coverage begins with air travel. The skies are off limits to all aircraft, civilian and commercial. Airports are closed down. Our April Call is live at Yeager Airport in Charleston with that part of the story. April, I can imagine it's a ghost town there this evening.
It really is, Sandra. As you can imagine, earlier this morning, the Federal Aviation Administration grounded all flights over the United States. That meant that any flights already in the skies had to find the nearest airport and land. Some of those planes landed here at Yeager Airport. Now, if you take a look behind me, you can really see that it is a virtual ghost town inside the terminal this evening. The counters are closed off. There really aren't many employees around. Most people have either made alternate arrangements to spend the night at a hotel or they've gone to get something to eat. Earlier today, though, that was not the case at all. The telephone banks were packed with people trying to make phone calls and make some alternative arrangements. We had increased security. The state police were on hand, as well as the sheriff's department, as well as airport security staff. It was all beefed up in response to this attack on America today. As we mentioned, the phone banks very, very busy as people tried to make some alternative plans. And as people watched television screens and the news reports, they had looks of disbelief and shock on their faces.
People are, I think, just stunned, of what has happened here to our country.
Well, it makes me very sad, really sad that people choose these methods to deal with their frustrations. I mean, I can't believe it.
Now, Holstead and her family were on their way to Paris, France on vacation from their home in San Francisco, California. They say right now their only goal is to get back home to San Francisco. They say they really don't want to be Americans traveling internationally right now. They don't think that is a safe place to be. But getting back home to San Francisco could be a very tall order because, as we've mentioned, all air traffic is closed off in the United States until at least sometime tomorrow. And that's the case at a lot of airports all across the country. Kristen Farley was at Tri-State Airport in Huntington a little earlier today. There were some passengers there who had just come from the front lines of this attack.
It's a symbol of American freedom, flying high over one of the thousands of places where freedom was taken away by Tuesday's attack.
It's kind of shocking that, somebody can get away with that, basically. You got to figure it was bound to happen anyways because, he'd been making threats forever. You need to take some action.
Michael Hillary was one of about a dozen passengers rerouted and grounded at Huntington's Tri-State Airport. Just hours before we spoke to him, he was in Washington, D.C., taking a test to become a U.S. Capitol Police officer. Would you want to go back and be there right now?
Oh, yeah, most definitely. We need as many, officers around there as we can. And
Hillary's plane, this Delta regional jet, was en route to Cincinnati from Dulles International Airport, the airport where two of today's hijacked flights were initiated.
When we landed, I was like, it looks pretty mountainous to be Cincinnati. But they didn't tell us on the plane because of, what if somebody was on the plane?
Another flight headed to Pittsburgh from Tri-State was turned around. The holding area was locked down and air travel was suspended across the country. Tri-State's director Larry Sawyer says he's never seen anything like this.
I don't know that you can exclude anyone from being the target of any one airport or any one city.
For the time being, travelers are urged to call ahead before trying to travel anywhere across the country. At Huntington's Tri-State Airport, Kristen Farley, 13 News.
As we've said, all flights have been grounded until noon tomorrow. That includes here at Yeager Airport. Now, if you take a look right over here, you can see there are some passengers that are beginning to float back in to try and make some alternative arrangements to get back out of town. As we said, they will not be able to do that until about noon tomorrow. That's when airports around the country, especially Yeager Airport and Tri-State Airport, are expected to open back up. In the meantime, there's some extra security measures underway, and they're asking people just to be patient and make those alternative arrangements as soon as possible. Sandra, one other thing we do want to mention is that HealthNet has also been grounded as a result of all this heightened security and alertness. So emergency response crews are going by ambulance only to respond to emergency situations right now.
Hopefully there won't be any accidents that would require HealthNet. That's all we can hope. All right, thank you very much. April Call live at Yeager Airport this evening. All Greyhound service has also come to a screeching halt in our area. A company spokesperson says all bus service in the Northeast has been canceled. Elsewhere, Greyhound has closed all of its terminals within 1 mile of federal office buildings. There's no estimate of how much the Greyhound system has ceased operations, nor for how long.
And Sandra, CNN is now reporting explosions in the Afghanistan capital of Kabul. That, of course, Afghanistan, the last known country to give asylum to bin Laden. So once again, CNN reporting explosions now in the Afghanistan capital of Kabul. We'll have more coming up from CBS on the half hour. Now, we do know of several local people at the Trade Center in New York and at the Pentagon in Washington at the time of the attacks today. Tom Jordan, a businessman from Huntington, was at the World Trade Center when the planes hit. He did survive and actually ran 12 miles to get back to his hotel. Tom Witt, a West Virginia University professor, was also there for a conference. He also escaped unharmed. Meanwhile, in Washington, Ben Mohebi, owner of the Hourly Computer in Huntington, was at the Pentagon. He is also reported safe tonight. A hijacked plane crashed in Pennsylvania this morning, not far from the West Virginia border. This is one of the 4 planes hijacked during this morning's attack. It crashed in Somerset County, Pennsylvania, about 80 miles southeast of Pittsburgh. 13 News reporter Kane Faribaugh has more tonight from the crash scene.
We're here in Somerset County, Pennsylvania, and this is where United Airlines Flight 93 crashed earlier today, just after 9 a.m. It's not certain exactly what piece of the puzzle this airplane crash fits into the terrorism that's been happening all across the United States, most notably in New York and Washington, D.C., but details are still surfacing about this plane crash. Information is slowly seeping out and filtering from the wreck site. What we know so far is that the plane did crash. Whether it is tied in with the terrorism is still not certain. There was a 911 phone call made from the airplane shortly before it crashed. The woman was calling the 911 center to explain that the airplane had been hijacked. The airplane crashed shortly after that 911 phone call was made. Rescue crews, the FAA, the National Transportation Safety Board, and scores of investigators, media, and rescue crews from all over the United States have descended here on Somerset County, Pennsylvania, not far from the small town of Shanksville. And obviously, if you can take a look at the area around here, it's nothing more than cornfields and meadowed hills. Very soon, we're going to travel down the road. We're going to be taken to the airplane crash site. What we know at the crash site so far is that not much notable exists there except for a large crater in the ground where the plane apparently made a 45-degree angle nosedive and crashed directly into the ground. Now, there were 5 crew members, what we know so far from United Airlines. There were 5 crew members, 2 pilots, and there were about 38 people on the airplane. At least 38 people are on the airplane. So far, no confirmation of a passenger list, no confirmation of a crew list, and there's still details surfacing about this horrible tragedy here in the beautiful countryside of Somerset County, Pennsylvania. Of course, all throughout the day, we're going to be bringing you details about this horrific tragedy and how it ties in to the national tragedy of terrorism we've been seeing in New York and Washington, D.C. Reporting from Somerset County, Pennsylvania, Kane Faribaugh, 13 News.
And we'll have more from Kane later.
That's right. And at this point, we are going to join CBS in New York for more on the breaking news that's happening in Afghanistan as we speak. So we're going to go to CBS, but stay with us because we will be back with more news on 13 News.
Afghanistan, we're going to hold off with any confirmation. The best we can say to you is there have been flames and some explosions in Kabul, Afghanistan. It's a very volatile situation inside Afghanistan. While the Taliban the radical Muslim strong men in government and political terms in Afghanistan control most of the country. They do not control all of it. And just yesterday, indeed, the leader of the opposition, one of the opposition forces to the Taliban, was the victim of a suicide attack, explosive planted in a television camera that with Mr. Mossad almost wiped him out, or may have indeed have killed him. All of that just to give you some sense of how volatile the situation is inside Afghanistan and how hard it is to nail down any facts. And while you no doubt have heard and will hear that the United States has sent missiles into Kabul, Afghanistan, we do not, I repeat, not have any confirmation of that. We have only the one report from a reporter, the CNN reporter.
All the information, then make a.
But we're not absolutely certain. In fact, we're not certain at all that this has been a missile attack.
American people make sure that this doesn't happen again.
Now we're seeking confirmation at the moment. Remember the following things. Defense Secretary Rumsfeld is expected to brief inside the Pentagon at some point early this evening. President Bush, on his way back to Washington, intends to speak to the nation. And let's go to David Martin at the Pentagon. David, what about these reports so far unconfirmed that U.S. missiles have landed in Kabul, Afghanistan? True, untrue, or unknown?
Unconfirmed right now, Dan. I have no information that would confirm that, but as you might imagine, stranded out here with cell phones, it is hard to reach people. But right now, I have no indication of that attack.
Thank you, David Martin at the Pentagon. Now let's go to London and CBS News correspondent Mark Phillips. Mark?
Dan, being separated by oceans and thousands of miles from the event in the U.S. today, the events in the U.S. today, hasn't lessened the shock or the sense of disbelief. People now watching both events in the States and, of course, in Kabul. No confirmation here either that the explosions in Kabul, explosions I will say that are not always a rare event, given the unstable nature of the place, whether they're the result of any kind of retaliatory reaction or not. There has been the world today to the events in the U.S. This was not just an American event, it was very much a global event. There were very few TV networks in the world who didn't offer full-time coverage once the attacks began this morning. The expressions of shock, disbelief, and sympathy came literally from around the world. Here in London, Prime Minister Blair talked about the people who perpetrated this act having no regard for sanctity or value of human life, that the democracies must come together to eradicate it. I'll tell you as well that strict security measures have been instituted here. Flights have been kept away from central London. There's much tighter security at the airports, both here and right across Europe as well. And also, they've stopped the process waiting to land at various airports here. Flights are running very late, if they're running at all. Condolences as well coming from right across Europe, from Vladimir Putin in Moscow, sending his condolences to the American people. And as I say, shock right around the globe. Dan?
Mark Phillips. Bureau in London. Dateline, New York, more than 200 ambulances are lined up on the west side highway of this city. They are waiting to transport the wounded. St. Vincent's Hospital in New York City, historic hospital with a worldwide reputation for emergency care. St. Vincent's Hospital is now, quote, saturated. St. Vincent's is located in Greenwich Village, right in the neighborhood of the World Trade Center, and has been just saturated since early this morning. The first wave of rescue workers that went into the World Trade Center were killed by. Now, we have not absolutely confirmed that, but we feel confident now in saying that at least some of the first wave of rescue workers that went into the World Trade Center, remember, one plane came in, that American Airlines plane came in first and hit one of the World Trade Center towers. Rescue workers rushed to the scene, of course, and then, you've seen it, we'll show it to you again shortly, that second plane came at much greater speed and hit the second building, and it's now increasingly apparent that some of the rescue workers in the first wave that went to the first building were killed by the second blast. Now, as for what's happening in Afghanistan, if you're saying to yourself, what about these pictures we're seeing from Afghanistan? We simply don't know what the situation is in Afghanistan, and we are being cautious, skeptical about information. Yes, there's at least one news organization reporting that missiles, American missiles, have struck Kabul, Afghanistan, but we do not. What we do know that there have been a series of explosions described in Kabul, Afghanistan, and clearly there's been at least one explosion that caused a good deal of fire in that capital of Afghanistan. But we simply have to wait for some kind of confirmation before we're going to report that any American. Is it possible? Yes. Is it probable? You decide. Is it a known fact? Not yet. Now, Sandy Berger, former head of the National on the set here at our World News headquarters, CBS headquarters in New York. But while he gets settled, we'll be talking to him shortly. We go.
Quiet, and people are just in shock, and I've never heard the city. I mean, there's a lot of people out on the streets, but it's very quiet, and they have the radios blaring from different buildings, and everybody's just kind of sitting around and listening, and it's very strange.
Well, Lisa, we are certainly glad that you are okay, and I'm very grateful that you were able to join us tonight.
Well,
thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good luck to you.
Thanks.
All right, well, all of these horrific events have shown us that we are not immune to international terrorism, even here at home, and Jason Nicholas is here with more on that.
You're exactly right, Deborah. We definitely are not immune here at home, especially in the Kanawha Valley. As other states and cities in our country were preparing for the worst, the same can be said for the many chemical plants in the Kanawha Valley. People from the Dow plant in South Charleston say they had no reason to believe their facility would be a terrorist target, but nonetheless, the plant observed heightened security measures all day long, and officials still aren't sure how long the high alert status will last.
We work hard all the time to have emergency plans in place for any eventuality. And even in situations like this, we take that responsibility very seriously. And those plans have been activated, and we're taking the precautions that are necessary according to those plans that are.
Ring says they periodically practice for situations such as these, but he also says that he nor anyone at Dow could ever anticipate something of this magnitude. And the number one concern is for everybody there, of course, is the safety of the employees, the plant's facilities, and people in the surrounding valley, not only at Dow, Deborah, but also at the DuPont plant in Bell. But last thing to mention is that all these plants are still under production right now, still producing whatever they produce over there, so definitely, but again, under heightened security.
Yeah, under high alert.
Right, exactly.
Okay, Jason, thank you very much. Going back to Bill now, Bill, Governor Wise earlier said this is war, and I think it's fair to say that most Americans are deeply affected by this act of terrorism.
Oh, Deborah, they really are. You know, we've heard from emails from our viewers who they want a swift and severe response. They are saying, hang your stars and stripes. This is a time for America to rally behind the situation that happened in New York and Washington. Imagine for a minute, this is such a unusual situation. It could have been you or me or one of our family members, one of our loved ones. The reaction is shock, it's terror, it's fear, the gamut, the entire gamut of reaction. Let's check in now with Dee Delancey, who is standing by in our Putnam County Bureau. And Dee, you talked to the people around Huntington today. I can only imagine what they told you.
Yeah, absolutely, Bill. Shock waves being felt in nearly every aspect of daily activities in and around West Virginia's second largest city. Tri-State Airport was shut down.
As soon as the aircraft in our airspace landed,
2 flights were grounded.
I really would not have expected and never thought that I'd ever see this day.
Joe Mayer was headed for Houston, Texas.
It's pretty minor, so we'd all like to get back to our wives and kids, but at this point, just don't worry about that.
The federal building in Huntington was closed. The Cabell County SWAT team activated. The courthouse evacuated at noon.
We think it's best for everyone involved, for the employees and the families, to go ahead and evacuate the building.
Marshall students gathered around television sets, classrooms disrupted by the violent attacks.
Our professor, he was unable to even complete the lecture. He's so upset.
These young people trying to deal with the worst act of terrorism in U.S. history.
I think it's probably the most tragic thing I've ever seen in my life. I don't know how anybody, no matter what reason, could justify these actions. It's just horrible, just horrible.
Dee, let's talk a little bit about air traffic. We know that due to this situation, the FAA shut down airports across the country. Do you have an update for us tonight?
Well, Bill, at least a confirmation of what we reported earlier, at least from Tri-State Airport, Larry Sawyers. He tells me that the airport will reopen at noon tomorrow. That is, Bill, if nothing changes.
All right, Dee Delancey in our Putnam newsroom tonight. Let's go back to Deborah Lenz in our Charleston studios. Deborah?
All right, thank you, Bill. We have just learned that we have Senator Rockefeller on the phone. Senator, where are you calling from exactly?
Actually, I'm calling from my home, but I've just come back from a briefing on this situation.
A briefing out in Washington?
Yes.
Can you tell us what you've learned? What did you talk about in that briefing?
I can't do that, but I can tell you that there's a very rapid, very strong sense of everything pulling together, not only to find out who the perpetrator was, but a coordination on a very bipartisan basis with very strong support for the president and his top team in, doing what we have to do to make sure this does not go unpunished.
Senator Rockefeller, what is your reaction when you saw the terrible events unfold today?
Like everybody else's, they're beyond belief, and we were all evacuated from the Capitol. We were told there was a plane headed towards the Capitol. There wasn't actually, but it wasn't until about an hour ago that they were sure that the skies were clear. So of airplanes, so that it's tricky around here. But the main thing is that, in spite of all of the terrible things that people are seeing, is to remember who we are, 282 million strong. There has been, as I talked to some of my colleagues on the Intelligence Committee and elsewhere, a tendency for people to panic. That is totally understandable. But this is a very strong country. We're going to get the people that did it, and life is going to go on. This is a very great country. A lot of people are in churches tonight reaffirming that.
Senator Rockefeller, President Bush said that he will do anything he can to get those who are responsible, and you just mentioned that. How are we going to get them? Do you have any idea who did this? We've been hearing Osama bin Laden, but that hasn't been confirmed.
No, I can't. I don't know how that will happen, regardless of who it is, whether it's external, internal, or both. External to the country, internal to the country, or both. But I do know that the president's resolve is strong, that this will not go unpunished, and that there is not a single person in the Capitol who doubts that for a moment.
Senator Rockefeller, also, we had heard that there were several explosions in Kabul, Afghanistan. Do you know anything about that, and if that is related to the events here in the United States?
That cannot be determined at this point. I mean, there are a lot of things coming in from all over the place, and one wants to draw conclusions. I think the focus here is what happened in New York City, what happened in Washington, D.C., who were the people who either organized this or perpetrated it, those who still remain alive, and how to make sure this doesn't happen again in what is basically a fairly new world now for us in the way of national security. But again, having said that, 282 million Americans strong and united.
Okay, and also we hear that President Bush may address the nation tonight at 9 o'clock. Do you know anything about that?
Not. He may and he may not.
Okay.
And I think that's, he's already talked to the nation twice today. I think that needs to be a decision that he makes based upon his own feeling and his own gut, and he will. And whatever that decision is, it'll be the right decision.
Okay, Senator Rockefeller, thank you very much for calling us. And if you could do us a favor and give us a call after this newscast, we would really appreciate it. We just need to talk to you again. And thank you for giving us your thoughts and views on all this.
Sure. You mean after you're over this evening?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on now, most schools remained open today, but a few county schools and some private ones sent some students home. Our Laura Baker is back in our newsroom, in our Charleston newsroom. Laura, these kids must be extraordinarily frightened, I would imagine.
Well, much like the rest of us, Deborah, they simply don't understand how something so devastating can happen in a nation where you feel so secure.
Other plane might be inbound.
Riverside High students are in class, but they're not getting much work done.
I don't see why anybody wants to do all this.
They are glued to the TV, watching the events unfold and wondering what could happen next.
This might lead to war, and can't imagine that.
Students at Cross Lanes Christian are supporting each other in the best way they know how.
During our chapel, we were all praying, and they were reading some verses
I mean, a lot of the younger kids, they were crying and everything because they don't really know what's happening.
The principal sent the kids home, deciding it was better for them to be with family at a time like this.
The more I heard, the more nervous I got, and it's kind of scary.
Now, Deborah, the state superintendent of schools, Dr. David Stewart, sent out a formal statement today because of all the phone calls he was getting from parents. He says the Department of Education recommends that schools remain open and operate on regular schedules. Of course, if that changes or any schools do decide to close on their own, we will be the first to let you know. Deborah?
We certainly will. Thank you, Laura. Well, in times of tragedy, it is natural for many to seek spiritual guidance, and Kenny Bass is in our studio now with more on that side of the story.
Deborah, there's
terrorists declare war on the United States, hijacking jetliners, crashing them into New York's World Trade Towers. Another airliner into the Pentagon, threatening the seat of national power. Thousands likely dead. Downtown New York in chaos. America wondering, what next? On Midtown Manhattan, and tonight America is at war with terrorists after a stunning series of attacks today against targets in New York and in Washington, D.C., the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. The terrorists used hijacked civilian airliners and their passengers as guided missiles in their attack. The most serious attack on this country since Pearl Harbor, and tonight the dead still are being counted. An unknown number still are missing. At this hour in this war, another development. There are reports out of Kabul tonight, the capital of Afghanistan, of explosions. But the Pentagon and the CIA are flatly denying that the United States had anything to do with those explosions. This has been one of the darkest days in America, and it is not yet over. Here at home now, a quick look at the locations where the 4 airliners hit. The Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in Lower Manhattan, 20 minutes apart. Then, within an hour this morning, the Pentagon. And then, the final crash just minutes later, about 80 miles southeast of Pittsburgh, 266 people on the 4 airplanes alone, all presumed to be dead. At the World Trade Center, even more than 9 hours now after this disaster began, officials do not know how many people were killed, how many still are trapped in all of the rubble. We do know that on most days there would be at least 20,000 people at work in the World Trade Center at the time that the airliners crashed into those Twin Towers. Another 90,000 could be expected in the vicinity of those towers in the course of an average workday. And of course, scores of police, firefighters, and other emergency personnel were in the area when the buildings came down. We're going to get the view now from the White House and our correspondent there, Campbell Brown, also from the Pentagon and from Jim Miklaszewski. And I'm going to join now with a complete account of what this day has been like from NBC's David Bloom, who's been my colleague all day long. David, bring us up to date.
Well, Tom, more than 9.5 hours since the first attack, the smoke billowing from the hulks behind me is now more gray than black, indicating that the fires have diminished somewhat, but it's still an extremely dangerous situation. Just within the last hour or so, a third building, a 40-story building, also collapsed. 40 more stories of concrete, steel, and iron crashed into the ground. A makeshift morgue has been set up near the World Trade Center. New York City police still sticking to their early estimates that the casualties ultimately may number in the thousands. Nothing more precise than that. We've put together a chronology of the events as America's watched, dumbfounded, and yes, outraged and defiant. The first attack plane, a hijacked American Airlines flight out of Boston, slams into the North Tower of New York's World Trade Center at approximately 8:42 a.m. Eastern Time. The explosions and fireballs broadcast live by television helicopters, which then, horrifically, spot the second attack plane, a United Airlines flight hijacked from Boston, taking dead aim at the World Trade Center's South Tower. It's now approximately 9:03 a.m.
Where the hell can I meet you? I'm across the street from the Marriott, man. A second airplane, a 727, just ran into the building.
Emergency officials estimate 20,000 or more people may have been inside the 2 110-story buildings at the time of the attacks. Eyewitnesses report victims falling, and in some cases, jumping from the two buildings.
But there were people falling out of the sky.
At 9:29 a.m., President Bush in Florida addresses the nation for the first time.
Terrorism against our nation will not stand.
But in the nation's capital, just 11 minutes later, 9:40 a.m., a third hijacked plane, an American flight out of Washington Dulles, crashes into the Pentagon in a burst of flames, the plane's wreckage tearing a gaping hole into one side of the building. Federal buildings are evacuated, government leaders taken to secure hideouts. 9:59 a.m., the until now unthinkable, the South Tower of the World Trade Center collapses. An unknown number of people still trapped inside, including the rescuers, firefighters and police who'd gone in trying to save lives. Then at 10 a.m., hundreds of miles away in western Pennsylvania, a fourth hijacked plane, a United flight out of Newark, crashes 80 miles southeast of Pittsburgh. 1/2 hour later, 10:28 a.m., the North Tower of the World Trade Center collapses. Rubble, debris spreading for blocks. In all, 266 people aboard 4 hijacked planes are killed. Untold others in Washington and New York missing and presumed dead. In New York, a defiant Mayor Rudolph Giuliani.
The city of New York in the United States of America is much stronger than any group of barbaric terrorists.
For the first time in U.S. history, the Federal Aviation Administration closes all domestic airports, shutting down all U.S. airspace until at least noon tomorrow. The U.S. military and American embassies worldwide placed on the highest alert. Navy aircraft carriers and destroyers deployed along the eastern seaboard. The president, now in Louisiana, speaks for a second time.
The resolve of our great nation is being tested. But make no mistake, we will show the world that we will pass this test.
The president is then taken to the Secure Strategic Air Command in Nebraska, meets with his national security team via teleconference before boarding Air Force One to return to Washington. But in New York late this afternoon, a third damaged building, the 40-story World Trade Center No. 7, also crashes to the ground. And emergency officials allow the first camera crew from NBC News inside the smoking hulks of the Twin Towers. Ground zero, cars overturned, steel torn apart, glass shards, small fires still burning. The very picture America most feared, the image terrorists most wanted. As to who might be responsible, a senior American intelligence official tells NBC News tonight that they are now, and I'm quoting here, 90% certain that Osama bin Laden, the Saudi-born terrorist, was responsible for today's attack. This official tells NBC News, quote, "This is not just surmise, this is new information." The president plans to address the nation from Washington, D.C. tonight. Tom?
Thank you very much, NBC's David Bloom. And we're going to go now to Washington, where NBC's Campbell Brown, who covers the White House, is on duty. But across the street from the White House, the president is expected back there shortly. Campbell?
Tom, the president is on his way back to Washington tonight. We're told that Air Force One is being escorted by F-15 fighter jets on each wing. As David said, he is planning to address the nation tonight. One aide says his message will be one of resolve and reassurance. And Tom, we are reporting to you tonight a block from the White House at a hotel. That's because those of us in the White House press corps, along with White House staff, were rushed out of the White House this morning as the entire complex was evacuated. Needless to say, this has been an extraordinary day for the president. One aide says when he spoke with his national security team in a live teleconference today, he said, quote, "We will find these people and they will suffer the consequences."
Steal. Yes, steal.
The president at a Sarasota, Florida elementary school about to begin a reading event gets first word shortly after 9 a.m. in a phone call from his national security advisor. One plane has crashed into the World Trade Center. Minutes later, Chief of Staff Andrew Card leans over and whispers in the president's ear. The reaction on Bush's face, the first sign of more horrifying news. A second plane has now hit the World Trade Center, with all indications this is a terrorist attack.
Today, we've had a national tragedy.
As Bush speaks, chaos at the White House. Staff and press are ordered to evacuate. People run from their offices across Pennsylvania Avenue. Crowds pour into the streets as buildings nearby are evacuated. People gather around car radios for any information. Fire engines blaze toward the White House. Shortly after 9:30 a.m., the president's national security team is in the Situation Room, a secure communications center in the basement of the West Wing. Vice President Dick Cheney is there, along with National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice. Meanwhile, the president leaves Florida, his destination at takeoff a secret. We later learn he's landed at Louisiana's Barksdale Air Force Base. There, he pledges, the U.S. will retaliate.
Make no mistake, the United States will hunt down and punish those responsible for these cowardly acts.
The president then flies to the Offutt Air Force Base in Omaha, Nebraska, the U.S. Strategic Air Command Center. We're in a bunker there. He convenes a national security meeting, joining his team live by teleconference. Back in Washington, his top advisor, Karen Hughes, insists the White House has the situation under control.
Your federal government continues to function effectively. We have a federal emergency response plan, and at President Bush's direction, we are implementing it.
By telephone, the president calls New York Mayor Giuliani and New York Governor Pataki. He also speaks with First Lady Laura Bush. The First Lady and Bush's two daughters are also rushed to secure secret locations. Mrs. Bush, on Capitol Hill when the attacks began, tries to offer words of reassurance.
Well, parents need to reassure their children everywhere in our country that they're safe.
We have just learned that Air Force One has safely landed at Andrews Air Force Base just outside of Washington. From our vantage point, we can see sharpshooters on the roof of the White House tonight, Secret Service patrolling the grounds, police cars driving up and down Pennsylvania Avenue, the White House in a lockdown as we wait to hear what the president has to say to the nation. Tom?
Thanks very much, NBC's Campbell Brown. And there are so many questions, but a major question tonight. How could they hijack 4 civilian jetliners in such a precise fashion? How do they pull all that off? Our aviation expert is NBC's Robert Hager, and he's standing by now in Washington as well. Robert?
Tom, 4 airliners turned into deadly weapons. There's a nationwide hold now on all commercial flights. That's the first time that's ever happened in our nation's history. And it lasts at least until midday tomorrow and might last longer than that. And there are also some chilling first details of what may have been going on in those cockpits. But first, the facts. The string of events that results in these 4 horrific crashes begins at Boston's Logan Airport, 7:45 a.m. American Flight 11, 767, with 92 on board. Supposed to fly Boston to Los Angeles, but over New York State, it's diverted, forced to fly south, directly into the North Tower of the World Trade Center. A long day of carnage is underway. Back in Boston, United Flight 175, another 767, with 65 aboard, is already in the air, also bound for Los Angeles, 15 minutes behind the first flight, when it too is hijacked. This, the actual plane, as it hits the South Tower of the World Trade Center. 8:10 a.m., American Flight 77, a 757 with 64 aboard, has taken off from Washington's Dulles Airport, also bound for Los Angeles. It, too, taken over and loops back into the Pentagon. It slices in at an angle, leaving a deadly and ugly gash in the nation's military nerve center. And finally, 8 a.m. out of Newark Airport, United's Flight 93, a 757 with 45 aboard, bound Newark to San Francisco, hijacked as well, but crashes short of whatever its intended target is, comes down in rural western Pennsylvania. Eyewitnesses there.
And I heard a loud noise, and I happened to look up, and it was a plane. It was real low to me. It sounded like it was running fine to me. I just kept watching. I watched it go nosedive straight into the ground.
You could see where the plane had made the initial impact in the ground, and it was still on fire. It made a crater probably 30 feet by 30 feet, and it's probably 15 or 20 feet deep, and there's just debris scattered within probably a half-a-mile radius.
There are only 2 ways terrorists can sneak themselves or their weapons aboard planes, either through passenger screening or by going unscreened through locked doors into off-limits areas or onto the tarmac. Periodic FAA tests have found plenty of flaws. Found when government agents tried to sneak into secure areas, they were successful more than 2/3 of the time. Found testers also often able to sneak fake guns and explosives by X-ray screening. Once aboard, Many speculate the hijackers must have disabled crews and taken over the plane's controls. More likely that than forcing a pilot with a gun at his head to fly right into the World Trade Center, for instance. Former American Airlines pilot Jim Tillman.
It is inconceivable to me that any airline pilot would allow anyone to force him to fly into an inhabited building. I cannot imagine how any pilot could be conscious or capable of doing anything to control that airplane at the time that it was directed at one of these buildings.
Terrorism specialist Neil Livingstone.
I suspect that what we're going to find is that the pilots were overwhelmed, perhaps dead already, and that trained pilots from the hijacker camp were in charge of those aircraft and were willing to die for their beliefs.
If there was time, if there was, the crews may have been able to press a button in the cockpit and send out a coded warning to controllers that there was a hijack in progress. Controllers may then have radioed back inquiries. But if the crews were disabled, the controllers would have been left in the dark for real information. Whatever else, controllers must have been surprised, in disbelief. There hadn't been a commercial plane hijacked in the U.S. for 10 years, since 1991. And now this.
There are several unconfirmed reports around that give little glimmers of what may have been going on in the cockpits. There's one from a controller in New Hampshire who says that a microphone was left on in the first plane of the day that was hijacked, that the pilot had his microphone keyed so it was picking up the what was going on in the cockpit, and that the controller then, off at the control center in New Hampshire, heard a terrorist say in English, "Don't do anything foolish." Then after that, the microphone went dead. The transponder of the plane went off. That's a device that radios information out to the radar, so controllers could only watch the blip. They could no longer tell what altitude the plane was at. There were several cell phone calls from relatives on board planes who reached their relative on the ground. One reported the terrorists had knife-like instruments, and there was one unconfirmed report that an American Airlines flight attendant actually reached her company to say that terrorists had killed the crew of her plane. Whatever else, we may know some more from the cockpit voice recorders, which could have survived those crashes and would give us an actual recording of what was going on for audio in the cockpits. Tom?
Thanks very much, NBC's Robert Hager at the Pentagon right now. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Henry Schultz. Let's hear what he has to say.
Our intense focus on recovery and helping the injured and the families of those who were killed is matched only by our determination to prevent more attacks and matched only by our unity to track down, root out, and relentlessly pursue terrorists, states that support them, and harbor them. They are the common enemy of the civilized world. Our institutions are strong, and our unity is palpable.
Senator John Warner.
Thank you. As a past chairman,
that is
preceding Carl Levin,
General Shelton, who is the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, talking about the institution strong and our unity is strong as war. We are on a war footing, in effect, in this country, even though there has been no official declaration of any kind. But from a military point of view, political point of view, and certainly from a psychological point of view, we are at war with these terrorists. The question is, who are they? Within the intelligence community, all the fingers are pointing at Osama bin Laden, the very wealthy Saudi dissident who has been harbored by the Taliban, it's widely believed, in Afghanistan. Let's get more tonight on the continuing speculation about who is responsible from NBC's Andrea Mitchell now at her post in the nation's capital. Andrea?
Tom, tonight U.S. intelligence officials are mobilizing worldwide to try to find the culprits and make sure that they don't strike again. An attack on America coordinated with military precision. 4 planes, split-second timing, penetration of airports and airspace, no warning.
They can destroy buildings, they can kill people, and we will be saddened by this tragedy, but they will never be allowed to kill the spirit of democracy. They cannot destroy our society. They cannot destroy our belief in the democratic way.
The first question tonight, is it over? The terrible answer, despite billions spent on U.S. intelligence, the nation's top experts do not know where or when terrorists will strike next.
The problem is that they are hard to penetrate. They are located in places that we're very hard-pressed to get any kind of information out of. And as hard as our agencies have tried, they've had some success. You don't hear about that. We only hear about the failure.
Who could have done this? Before today, the worst failure, the attack on 2 U.S. embassies in Africa 3 years ago. Again, perfectly timed, no warning, 224 dead. The alleged mastermind, America's most wanted terrorist, Osama bin Laden. Bin Laden also involved, U.S. officials say, in helping the man convicted of bombing the World Trade Center, Ramzi Youssef, 9 years ago, by protecting Youssef before and after that attack. Last winter, CIA Director George Tenet told Congress that bin Laden is capable of multiple attacks with little or no warning.
Osama bin Laden and his global network of lieutenants and associates remain the most immediate and serious threat.
Bin Laden's alleged Millennium plots planned attacks on 3 tourist areas in Jordan frequented by Americans, on Los Angeles International Airport, and on a U.S. destroyer in Yemen, all foiled. But 6 months later, terrorists do strike successfully, ram another destroyer, the USS Cole, killing 17. In June, bin Laden brags on this home video of killing U.S. sailors, a remarkable tape made to recruit more terrorists against America. And just 3 weeks ago, a warning to a London newspaper, allegedly from bin Laden's group, that he was targeting America again.
I think it is a dilemma for the United States now. I believe the only thing is, to revise their policies, to look at what's happening. Why, for example, the anti-American sentiment is very high in the Middle East and in the Muslim world.
How could this happen? Only from a massive intelligence failure. But in this case, at least there will be some evidence.
The good news is that the hijacking 4 airplanes is a very complicated operation. Even hijacking 1 is complicated. And they will have left some trail behind them. They will have had to have checked in, and they will have had to have purchased tickets either under their name or alias names.
If the U.S. cracks the case, how will it retaliate? Current and former officials say massively, but carefully.
If we're going to act, we need to be able to convince the world that we were justified in our actions. We had that evidence during the African embassy bombings, and I think it's critical that the intelligence community now begin to develop that with respect to these attacks.
Today, Afghanistan's Taliban leaders deny any involvement by Osama bin Laden. But as David Bloom alluded to earlier, intelligence officials and others are telling NBC tonight that they are 90% sure that bin Laden is involved. And Tom, if that proves to be the case, there is no doubt in anyone's mind that the U.S. will retaliate.
But the question is, how do they find Osama bin Laden, and who do they retaliate against?
They cannot find Osama bin Laden. They have not been able to. He is #1 on the most wanted list of the FBI. They have warned the Taliban that they will respond against Afghanistan's leaders. So the attack would be against Afghanistan. Within the last 3 weeks, they have warned Afghanistan that they will hold the Taliban personally responsible if Osama bin Laden attacks the United States.
Andrea, already there is talk about a massive intelligence failure. It's not so much the blame game as much as it is that this could happen again. There have been a number of red flags that have gone up for years now, but even in Washington at the highest political levels, people have refused to take them as seriously as this day indicates they should have.
Exactly right. I mean, in our report, Senator Warren Rudman, former senator, you spoke to him earlier today. He and Gary Hart, another former senator, had a blue panel commission, a blue ribbon commission. They warned that the nation's defense, the national defense here at home, not overseas, is the greatest vulnerability. That was in February and March. Not much has been done. The bureaucracy moves so slowly, and after the 1998 bombings, Tom, America's embassies were not greatly enhanced in their security, partially, but Congress rejected demands by 2 secretaries of state to beef up security to a much greater level overseas.
Thank you very much, NBC's Andrea Mitchell. The United States, at once so powerful and so innocent in its worldview in so many ways. Let's go to our Pentagon correspondent now, NBC's Jim Miklaszewski. Jim, you have some information for us about why these particular targets might have been chosen.
Well, these particular targets, first of all, the World Trade Center for its very high profile and the obvious trap that the terrorists set. After the first attack, they knew very well that all television cameras in one of the most media-intensive centers of the world would be focused on those twin towers, so that when that second plane came in with that horrific video of it striking the second tower, that would achieve a monumental victory for them. The target here, obvious. The most powerful, the center of the most powerful military in the world. Tom?
All right, thanks, NBC Jim Miklashevsky. I'm told that Marine One, the helicopter bearing the president from Andrews Air Force Base back to the White House now, is landing on the White House lawn. We do expect to hear from the president before the end of this night. He has had a long and challenging day, beginning in Florida, then going to Louisiana, and then to Offutt Air Force Base, the home of the Strategic Air Command, before returning here to his office at the White House this evening. He'll be meeting with his national security advisors. By then, Colin Powell, the Secretary of State, may be back from his trip to Peru. Also, Condoleezza Rice, who's been in the White House all day long and informed him of all of this. And Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld, Vice President Dick Cheney, who has managed to stay in the White House, too. These are the kinds of days that you know in the back of your mind may occur when you become the President of the United States and the Commander-in-Chief when you're on the campaign trail. But the cold, hard reality has been visited on this president, one of the greatest national security crises this country has faced in many, many years within his first year in office. So let's just watch for a moment and see if we can't see the president as he gets off the helicopter, and then under very heavy guard. There is extraordinary security now at the White House. The sharpshooters on the roof, people have been cleared out. Our correspondents are operating from across the street. We'll see whether we can see him as he moves from Marine One into the Oval Office. Mick, we had, as we expected earlier today, the president had a fighter plane escort coming from Omaha back to Washington, and my guess is that he must have had one earlier today when he left Florida, and also when he went from Louisiana up to SAC. Jim,
it was shortly after the attacks occurred on the World Trade Center that the Pentagon went into a crisis mode. They were trying to establish exactly what additional threats there may be, and then it was just about 28 minutes after that that the airplane hit here. It was after the attack on the Pentagon that the Air Force then decided to scramble F-16s out of the D.C. National Guard Andrews Air Force Base to fly cover, a protective cover over Washington, D.C. It was something straight out of a war zone, Tom. One Air Force officer standing next to me looking up in the sky at the F-16 said, "My God, we're flying cover on the nation's capital."
All right, Jim, let's continue to watch here as the president still is on Marine One. We do expect that momentarily he'll be exiting that helicopter and moving briskly into the Oval Office. Laura Bush, he had talked to earlier today. She had been moved to a secure location. His brother Jeb Bush declared a state of emergency in the state of Florida after the president left today, a contingency that a lot of governors took around the country. Secret Service detail exiting first. There were Secret Service offices and a number of other government offices in the World Trade Center. There's the president now, walking to what will prove to be one of the longest and most important nights of his presidency. Back into the White House Oval Office. We do expect him to address the nation later. His father, obviously, was president during the Operation Desert Storm, the Persian Gulf War. His father had been the ambassador to the United Nations, director of the CIA, and vice president of the United States for 8 years before he occupied the Oval Office. There is very little in your experience as governor of Texas or even as a senator of the United States or almost any other job to prepare you for these kinds of occasions. Let's go to NBC's Campbell Brown. Campbell, what can you tell us about the plans for tonight?
Well, Tom, we're not sure as of yet exactly what time the president will be addressing the nation, but now that we do know that he is back at the White House, he will likely be joining the vice president and the national security advisor, Condoleezza Rice, in a room, what's referred to as the Situation Room in the White House. This is a wood-paneled room, extremely secure, in the basement of the West Wing. And in that room is a giant conference room around a big table. There are 10 chairs. There are about 20 chairs around the perimeter of the room, and there are 2 giant video screens that can open up where the president and his team can meet and essentially watch all of the communications coming in from around the country, or around the world, rather. Right next to that conference room is a special communications center where 4 people are on staff 24 hours a day, military, State Department, intelligence, who are sifting through all the cables, all the information, providing them instantly to the president and his team. That's where the vice president's been all day with the national security advisor and other key personnel. In all likelihood, the president is joining them there now to get an update before he addresses the nation. Tom?
All right, thanks very much, NBC's Campbell Brown. And at his side, he will have veterans of other crises in the national security of this country. Vice President Dick Cheney was Defense Secretary during the Persian Gulf War. Donald Rumsfeld served as Defense Secretary before and also as White House Chief of Staff. Condoleezza Rice has been on the staff of the National Security Council during President George Herbert Walker Bush's administration, President 41 Bush, as they like to describe him. Now back here in New York, as you can see behind me, the billowing smoke, the continuing dust and debris from the collapse of the World Trade Center earlier today, and then Trade Center number 7, a 40-story building that went down. But the World Trade Center, one of the targets of the terrorists today, is one of the most distinctive architectural edifices in the world. The world's largest commercial complex, completed in 1976, an architectural marvel, its details immense. A massive twin structure, 110 stories tall, built of 600,000 square feet of glass and 200,000 tons of steel, 1,350 feet tall, 43,000 windows, 99 elevators, and a home for 1,200 businesses. Businesses where 50,000 people work. Businesses that include commodity exchanges, investment firms, law firms, banks, restaurants, a hotel, government offices, a top and observation deck, a renowned tourist attraction. The Trade Center could draw 90,000 additional visitors on a busy day. Today, the Twin Towers, many of those inside, gone. That's just one of the many reasons, of course, that today will be remembered as one of the worst days in the nearly 400-year history of the great city of New York. And NBC's Pat Dawson has been on the streets of New York, very near the World Trade Center throughout most of the day. He's been witness to the heroic rescue efforts that were effected there today. And of course, tonight, Pat, still an unknown number of dead trapped there in the rubble.
It's very true, Tom. Police, fire, and emergency workers first on the scene this morning knew they had a catastrophe of unprecedented proportions. What they didn't realize is that after they arrived, it would get worse, and that many of them would be victims as well.
Within minutes of the attack, New York rescue crews responded. Dozens of emergency workers running headlong into the chaos, a swirling mass of fire and smoke more than 60 stories up. Chief Albert Turry of the New York Fire Department was one of the first on the scene.
The initial reaction was that it was an absolute terrorist attack.
His job, direct a rescue effort inside the Trade Center. His team of 200 firefighters fanned out into the burning towers to search for survivors.
When that first tower fell, I was trying to evacuate everybody 3 blocks north, away from every high-rise building in the area.
But when the towers started crumbling, crashing all around them, the original rescue effort became an exercise in survival, the rescuers themselves running for their lives.
But I'm telling you right now, there wasn't time to evacuate our people.
Most of those that did make it out of the Trade Center covered in debris, ghostly figures coughing and vomiting from the smoke and dust.
It was the most horrific scene I've ever seen in my whole life. We saw the World Trade Center in flames, a big gaping hole all the way on the top of it. We could see people jumping from the top of the building.
At midday, the financial district of Lower Manhattan looks like a war zone. With no idea if another attack is imminent, hundreds of companies throughout New York send their workers home. Bridges and tunnels across the Hudson River are closed. Mass transit shut down.
There are over 1,000 rescue workers, probably about 2,000 that are deployed, trying to get into the buildings, trying to find people, trying to search for people. The governor and I spoke a couple of hours ago. The governor has deployed the National Guard to relieve them because our people are going to need reinforcements pretty soon. But right now they don't want to leave because they're searching for innocent citizens, and they're searching for some of their brothers and sisters.
When rescuers finally got inside the trade towers, the damage left many of them shocked at the near total devastation. There's no way to estimate casualties. Thousands are believed dead. For those used to saving lives, the frustration is overwhelming.
When you start talking to a New York police officer and they start crying for what they've seen in the last couple hours, you know the seriousness and the gravity of the situation.
Throughout the day, rescuers have faced a terrible choice with hundreds, perhaps thousands of people trapped in the rubble in there. When is it safe to go back in? And Tom, the most vivid example of that referred to by David Bloom a little while ago, that, of course, the loss of Building 7 of the World Trade Center just over my shoulder, which tumbled to the ground 8 hours after this attack began. Tom?
NBC's Pat Dawson in Lower Manhattan tonight, and of course, for many of the people who lived through all of that, it will be one of the unforgettable moments of their lives. NBC's Ann Thompson was in the vicinity of the World Trade Center when the buildings began to come down. Ann?
Tom, this is the view tonight down West Broadway. Smoke's filling the air where the two towers in building number 7 stood. In the last hour, we have seen busloads of police, of doctors, and ambulance after ambulance go into that area to try to repair a city that's been mortally wounded by this attack.
A direct hit that shattered New York City's confidence.
Well, as soon as the first building collapsed, everybody made a mad dash to just take cover.
And everybody just started running. I just happened to duck right into the post office.
As soon as we got out of the train station, people were screaming and crying and yelling, and it was just total chaos. And the bottom of our building was blown out.
For me, Ground Zero, Fulton and Broadway, about 2 blocks from the World Trade Center, just as the South Tower crumbled.
Hollywood could never imagine something like this. A tidal wave of smoke and debris came roaring down Broadway. I was standing at the corner of Fulton and Broadway. I ran into a building, ran between a column and a building at 195 Broadway, and pushed my face and my body into that building. For what seemed like 5 minutes, I was pelted with all kinds of debris. I crouched down, was coughing, trying to breathe. You couldn't get any air. The air was so full of smoke and dust. When it finally settled, I stood up. My glasses were covered with dust. Hours later, I'm still covered with dust. The building that I was in front of, 195 Broadway, the doors were gated shut. They opened the doors, let us in, and inside we were finally able to breathe. It wasn't easy. My eyes were filled with dust. My mouth was filled with dust. I was choking. The people I was with were choking. It was just absolutely horrific. All I could think of was, this is war.
I just heard the rumble, and then I ran like hell, and there was a large wind coming.
Down here, panic. Survivors flee by whatever means they can, fearing more destruction at any moment.
At 10:30, I tried to leave the building, but as soon as I got outside, I heard a second explosion and another rumble and more smoke and more dust. I ran inside the buildings, the chandeliers shook, and again, black smoke filled the air. Within another 5 minutes, we were covered again with more silt and more dust. And then a fire marshal came in and said we had to leave because if there was a third explosion, this building might not last.
Everyone, please clear the corner.
Palpable fear as people run through the streets, choking on dust and debris.
You gotta chase him. Come on, let's go, let's go.
We saw the building come down. We all ran, and the walkway held up to save like 40 or 50 of us that were right there. We were buried there, and then cops shot out windows in the next building. It was the only thing that was in front of us was like these 1-inch windows.
The streets of the financial district covered with debris, in some cases ankle deep. Cars on fire, cars just turned by the force of the explosions. It was like something no one had ever seen.
Panic, like smoke, heads uptown. Officials ordering precautionary evacuations of some of New York City's landmarks.
This is an orderly evacuation of 30 Rockefeller Plaza.
On the street, anxious commuters trying to call home, cell phone service dead. At Grand Central Station, travelers desperate to get out of the city.
It's going to take a long time, but you're going to see Mama and Papa today, okay?
Outside the station, a surreal scene. People buying postcards of the Twin Towers that no longer exist. As the day wears on, witnesses who survived the attack now face a new horror, searching for missing friends and co-workers.
We can't account for all of our employees. We're just in a state of shock.
The biggest, busiest city in the world, the attack revives fears of the 1993 bombing. Suddenly, nowhere in the financial district seems safe.
Did you ever think this could happen again?
Police headquarters right downtown. No, I really didn't. I lived through the first one.
After a tragedy so great, tonight a city comes together, searching for safety and comfort.
Tom, now this area is more than just a business district. It is also where people live. And within the last hour, we have seen families bringing suitcases, crates carrying their family pets to leave and to go elsewhere. They have no water, they have no gas, and there is also the fear that more buildings will collapse. The area is covered by police from all over New York City, and they tell us that they will be here through the night. Tom?
All right, thanks very much, NBC's Ann Thompson. But let me ask you, after you finally emerged from that building, what about other people who could not get into a building? What kind of casualties did you see?
Tom, I will tell you that when I walked out of the building on Broadway and headed down towards Canal, it was as if there had been a blizzard of debris and dust all over the street. I saw people running, I was walking, there were a lot of rescue people there, but there were people injured. I saw a woman being carried by two men. It was like something I had never seen anything like it, and all I could think of was just to get away from there, to get to safety. And as I kept walking to Canal Street, I could hear yet another explosion behind me. It was truly one of the most frightening moments I've ever lived through.
Thanks very much, NBC's Ann Thompson. Any number of NBC News personnel were caught in all of that today. Among them, our producer Mary Beth O'Toole and correspondent Rahema Ellis, and they provided us tonight with a kind of a video diary. We'd like to share that with you now. Well, we'll hope to get back to Rahema Ellis. Obviously, we're having some difficulty with what has been going on with the audio part of our broadcast tonight. In that particular videotape, this is a live picture looking across New York Harbor, and I'll ask your forbearance and patience here because we are doing the very best we can under, as you might expect, some very trying circumstances. That's looking across from the other side, from the New Jersey side, at the lower end of Manhattan. That is a picture that has been going on all day, but when it began, there were the two 110-story towers of the World Trade Center. They are now gone from the Manhattan skyline. It's still a stunning thought to realize that they have been brought down so coldly and so efficiently in such a cold-blooded fashion by these hijacked airliners in this terrorist attack. Another colleague who captured some of the most horrifying moments today is Christian Martin. He's a native New Yorker and he's a producer at Dateline. He had his own camera with him when the buildings began to come down.
And I saw a tourist with a video camera, so I said, you know, let me buy that from you. I took a shot of a huge wheel of a plane lying in the middle of the avenue. There was all these sort of white sheets in the middle of the street, which took me a minute to figure out what those were. I mean, the collapse happened 10 minutes after I got the camera. I shot a couple of shots of the building burning. I was shooting the building, and the building started to collapse, and that happens pretty slowly. Everyone gets into the job for adventure. This turned sour pretty fast. You know, I was down in Oklahoma City, and I got there about 4 hours afterwards, and that was pretty chaotic. This was about 1,000 times worse and more chaotic than that. And then, you know, the cop was like, run, run, to save my life. I had literally a mouthful of soot. You couldn't see, it was just... And then people were just remarkable, you know? I mean, everyone was just in a horrible, horrible place. You couldn't see, everyone was hurt. I was so lucky, so lucky. So much luckier than so many other people. I mean, you just cannot overemphasize how many completely innocent, beautiful people were just, you know, destroyed by this.
One of our producers, Christian Bernard, tonight, in his own words, he was there in the middle of it. Christian Martin is a producer for Dateline. He managed to buy a camera from a tourist and then almost lost his life as he was trying to record what was going on down there. We want to tell you that momentarily we do expect to hear from the Attorney General of the United States, John Ashcroft, who does have supervisory responsibility for the FBI. He's our chief law enforcement officer. And also from the Secretary of Health and Human Services, Tommy Thompson, the former governor of Wisconsin. He'll be dealing with a lot of the relief that is going on. Behind me, you can see the dusk is now beginning to settle over the city of New York, and the billowing smoke is still emanating from the lower part of Manhattan, the site of what was once two towers, each 110 stories high. 20,000 people, we believe, are in them at that time when they were attacked today. And the 40-story 7 Trade Center now missing from the Manhattan skyline. We're going to see if we can't get Rahema Ellis back. She was with Mary Beth O'Toole today. They had a kind of a video diary. So let's join that now. We may have to come out of it as we go to Attorney General Ashcroft, but let's hear from Rahema.
New York City's Brooklyn Bridge, normally clogged with vehicles, today an escape route. It's 11:45 in the morning, and there is a mass exodus from downtown New York City. You can take a look, and you can see hundreds of thousands of people leaving the area.
These heinous acts of violence are an assault on the security of our nation. They're an assault on the security and the freedom of every American citizen. We will not tolerate such acts. We will expend every effort and devote all the necessary resources to bring the people responsible for these acts, these crimes, to justice. Now is the time for us to come together as a nation to offer our support, our prayers for victims and for their families, for the rescue workers, for law enforcement officials, for every one of us that has been changed forever by this horrible tragedy. The following is a summary of the known facts surrounding today's incidents. American Airlines Flight 11 departed Boston for Los Angeles, hijacked by suspects armed with knives. This plane crashed into the World Trade Center. United Airlines Flight 175 departed Boston for Los Angeles, was hijacked and crashed into the World Trade Center. American Airlines Flight 77 departed Washington Dulles for Los Angeles, was hijacked and crashed into the Pentagon. United Airlines Flight 93 departed Newark for San Francisco, was hijacked and crashed in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. Crime scenes have been established by the federal authorities in New York, in Washington, D.C. area, in Pittsburgh, in Boston, and in Newark. The full resources of the Department of Justice, including the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Immigration and Naturalization Service, the U.S. Attorney's offices, the U.S. Marshals Service, the Bureau of Prisons, the Drug Enforcement Administration, and the Office of Justice Programs are being deployed to investigate these crimes and to assist survivors and victim families. Thousands of FBI agents in all of the field offices across the country and in the international Legat offices, assisted by personnel from other Department of Justice agencies are cooperating in this investigation. The FBI has established a website where people can report any information about these crimes. That address is www.ifccfbi.gov. That address again, www.ifccfbi.gov. Individuals can report any information they know about these crimes to that website. It takes courage for individuals to come forward in situations like this, and I urge anyone with information that may be useful and helpful to authorities to use this opportunity. The Office of Victims of Crime has established a toll-free 800 number for family and friends of victims. They can call 800-331-0075 to leave contact information for a future time when more information is available, to find out information about a victim, or to find out information about the rights of victims and the services available to victim survivors and victim families. The determination of these terrorists will not deter the determination of the American people. We are survivors, and freedom is a survivor. A free American people will not be intimidated, nor will we be defeated. We will find the people responsible for these cowardly acts, and justice will be done. Tommy.
Every single American lost something today. And every one of us at this time expresses our deepest sympathy to the victims of today's tragedies and their families. It is now our mission to begin the healing from this tragedy. From the moment that we learned of these attacks, the Department of Health and Human Services has begun readying teams and resources to be sent to New York City and the Washington area to meet any needs of state and local officials. So far, we have sent 4 disaster medical teams to New York City, and 3 of these disaster medical teams to the Washington, Northern Virginia, Baltimore area. These medical teams each consist of about 35 physicians, nurses, and emergency medical technicians. They are all trained to deal with traumatic injuries and other emergency needs. We've also sent 4 disaster mortuary operational response teams to New York and 3 to the greater Washington area. We're also in the process of shipping a great deal of emergency medical supplies to New York City with the help of the Centers for Disease Control. In short, we're making the full force of the Department of Health and Human Services, both its resources and medical expertise available to the areas that need our assistance. We've also this afternoon activated the United States Public Health Service Commission Corps, which consists of approximately 6,000 health professionals. We also are giving backup assistance to the 500-bed ship Comfort from the United States Navy. Americans all over are calling up and asking what they can do. The best thing they can do is respond to this great call by volunteering to give blood. We need Americans to continue to answer that call. No matter where you live, please do your civic duty and assist us by donating blood. It is our primary job is to make sure Americans harmed by this tragedy get the help that they need. We will remain in constant contact with the governors, the mayors, public health officials, and other local officials to make sure that all their needs are being met. It is a sad day, but America and all of its citizens certainly share tonight in the grief that has been caused And as the President and everybody in his administration have said, we, the government, will continue to operate and continue to provide the services to all Americans.
Secretary of Health and Human Services Tommy Thompson with John Ashcroft, who is the Attorney General of the United States, talking about the role of the federal government now in tracking down those people who are responsible for today's attacks, and then the process of healing physically and psychologically and politically this country. Big part of the story today, the medical response. Witnesses kept saying the scene today was like a war zone. In fact, one of the rescue workers said, I spent a year in combat. I never saw anything quite like all of this. New York area has first-rate medical facilities, and many of them, and NBC's Robert Bazell was at one of them today, and he joins us now. Robert?
Tom, within minutes of the first explosion, thousands of doctors and nurses at hundreds of hospitals around the New York City area responded with emergency plans to the biggest medical crisis this city has ever faced. At the scene of the explosions and building collapse, emergency workers set up triage sites to put the dead aside and move the most critically wounded to area hospitals. The closest trauma center to the World Trade Center is St. Vincent's in New York's Greenwich Village. A steady stream of ambulances began minutes after the explosion and continued through the day with many kinds of injuries.
Several fractures, several patients have already been to the operating room, and because of the intense fire and smoke, multiple patients with inhalation injuries, and they're being monitored in critical care units.
Medical staff stood prepared to meet each ambulance, some carrying many injured. This one hospital sent out a call for blood donors, and within minutes, so many volunteers appeared that the hospital was swamped and arranged for buses to take donors to other hospitals.
What if you know you just owe and you're not sure whether you're negative or positive?
More than 400 casualties were taken across the Hudson River to hospitals in New Jersey and Staten Island.
What next? Oh my God.
Among the first casualties, about 1 in 5 were rescue workers, firefighters, police, and EMS technicians involved in the rescue effort. Many of the rescuers, hardened by years of tragedies, said they had never seen anything as bad.
They turned in tonight for about 2 or 3 minutes and took an inventory of myself and went about.
As of late this evening, the total number of casualties taken to all area hospitals stands near 1,000. And that number is very low because rescue workers expect that there are still thousands of people buried underneath all of that rubble. And all of the doctors and nurses expect that they are going to be treating casualties from the rubble for several days to come. Tom?
All right, thanks very much, NBC's Robert.
What you could do is run, and if you could, help. For those inside the World Trade Center, it wasn't just hell on earth. For Bob Fox, it was hell 39 stories up.
It was unbelievable. I was on the 39th floor about 8:45 when a tremendous explosion hit.
Those lucky enough to get out walked out of one danger right into another. A moonscape of ash and debris, smoke and fire, leaking gas, and already the smell of death.
Debris, smoke, all the dust, everything, just couldn't see nothing. I was praying to God then that, let me get by this now.
Ironworker Tony Cabrera rushed toward the carnage to try and help.
And I seen the second plane hit. I went into this lobby. When I went into the lobby, I was there with the fire department and everything, and just, it was starting to give away this and that, pieces of people coming down, parts, and whatever.
Never seen anything like it.
Never.
Rescuers were at a loss. Smoke so thick they couldn't see the damage. The clamor of falling debris so loud they couldn't hear the cries for help. All of it made worse when the first of the Twin Towers came tumbling down upon them.
Go! Come on! Let's go! Let's go!
After the first series of explosions, there was hardly time to get in, and those that did were right in line of fire for the next series of explosions. As the second tower collapsed, Val Coleman had a front row seat to disaster, watching it all unfold out of his apartment window just 5 blocks away.
And a great blossom of flame, a huge red fireball, scared the hell out of me.
Val Coleman was inside the World Trade Center just 15 minutes before the initial attack and remembers the last person he talked with.
A very nice young man answered me very politely. I left, came back here, and boom, he's probably dead.
And as he sat watching the building burn, Coleman could see tiny black specks near the top floors. They were people, jumping off instead of being burned alive.
I must have seen 10 or 15 people come down, one after another.
Off the top?
Off what appeared to be the top.
The bombings today brought one horrific scene after another.
Oh my God! Oh my God!
But rescuers know once they get closer to what's left of the Twin Towers, the images are sure to get worse. But the workers, for many of them, though, they are still waiting. We are told now, Dan, that firefighters are trying to stretch ladders out across some of the debris to begin putting out some of the fires that have been burning all day long. But active search and rescue efforts are still on hold at this hour. There is still hope here tonight. But for the moment, it's being tempered by an overwhelming sense of helplessness. Dan.
Lee Cowan, one of our many reporters covering in Lower Manhattan. The terror attacks on the World Trade Center struck deep into the hearts of New Yorkers. Many were witness to or victims of this cowardly act of mass destruction. CBS's Mika Brzezinski has been out among them on the streets of New York.
There was terror in the streets while the Twin Towers burned. With gridlock on the ground, crowds watched from afar and prayed.
You don't see people jumping from the windows.
Police jumped into action, moving the crowds behind police lines, away from danger.
Let's go!
But not far enough. One after another, the towers fell to pieces, debris falling onto hundreds of onlookers. Somewhere behind the billow of smoke, an American icon had disappeared, transforming the New York skyline forever. On the sidelines, people watched and wept. Others, covered in soot and debris, counted their blessings. Even now, no one can guess the number of dead and wounded. Adding to the confusion, cell service was crippled, cutting the lifeline for families trying to locate loved ones. Only a few could get through.
It's gonna be okay.
Nearby schools evacuated so quickly parents had no idea where to go to find their children. Everywhere there was terror and confusion.
Everybody, please start walking towards the east side.
Finally, people simply walked away from Lower Manhattan. An eerie calm prevailed as police evacuated the area. Cell phone service for much of New York City is still somewhat crippled, though the situation is getting better. Several forms of transportation have been affected. Several subway lines are suspended indefinitely, and train service out of the city is limited. It will be no business as usual for school kids in New York City tomorrow. All New York City public schools are closed, at least for tomorrow. And the mayor of New York said earlier today, stay home and stay calm. At least try. Dan.
Mika Brzezinski. The specter is being raised tonight of hundreds and perhaps thousands, that's a quote from one New York City official, hundreds, perhaps thousands of people being in effect buried alive by the avalanche of destruction which developed in the wake of the two planes hitting the World Trade Centers today. Keep in mind that some rescue workers, firemen and policemen early on the scene were believed to have been killed. They've been unable to put out all the fires, much less get into the rubble and look for possible survivors in the rubble. That's the reality of this dark night in New York City. Now an eyewitness report from one of our own. Minutes after the initial attacks on the World Trade Center towers, CBS News correspondent Carol Maureen was on the scene, just in time for a frighteningly close encounter with catastrophe.
As I'm making my way toward the Trade Center, along the water line, thousands of people were walking towards me, streaming out, almost not talking.
Good evening. Today, our fellow citizens, our way of life, our very freedom came under attack in a series of deliberate and deadly terrorist acts. The victims were in airplanes or in their offices, secretaries, businessmen and women, military and federal workers, moms and dads, friends and neighbors. Thousands of lives were suddenly ended by evil, despicable acts of terror. The pictures of airplanes flying into buildings, fires burning, huge structures collapsing, have filled us with disbelief, terrible sadness, and a quiet, unyielding anger. These acts of mass murder were intended to frighten our nation into chaos and retreat. But they have failed. Our country is strong. A great people has been moved to defend a great nation. Terrorist attacks can shake the foundations of our biggest buildings, but they cannot touch the foundation of America. These acts shatter steel, but they cannot dent the steel of American resolve. America was targeted for attack because we're the brightest beacon for freedom and opportunity in the world, and no one will keep that light from shining. Today, our nation saw evil, the very worst of human nature, and we responded with the best of America, with the daring of our rescue workers, with the caring for strangers and neighbors who came to give blood and help in any way they could. Immediately following the first attack, I implemented our government's emergency response plans. Our military is powerful, and it's prepared. Our emergency teams are working in New York City and Washington, D.C. to help with local rescue efforts. Our first priority is to get help to those who have been injured and to take every precaution to protect our citizens at home and around the world from further attacks. The functions of our government continue without interruption. Federal agencies in Washington, which had to be evacuated today, are reopening for essential personnel tonight and will be open for business tomorrow. Our financial institutions remain strong, and the American economy will be open for business as well. The search is underway for those who are behind these evil acts. I've directed the full resources of our intelligence and law enforcement communities to find those responsible and to bring them to justice. We will make no distinction between the terrorists who committed these acts and those who harbor them. I appreciate so very much the members of Congress who have joined me in strongly condemning these attacks. And on behalf of the American people, I thank the many world leaders who have called to offer their condolences and assistance. America and our friends and allies join with all those who want peace and security in the world, and we stand together to win the war against terrorism. Tonight, I ask for your prayers for all those who grieve, for the children whose worlds have been shattered, for all whose sense of safety and security has been threatened. And I pray they will be comforted by a power greater than any of us, spoken through the ages in Psalm 23. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for you are with me. This is a day when all Americans from every walk of life unite in our resolve for justice and peace. America has stood down enemies before, and we will do so this time. None of us will ever forget this day, yet we go forward to defend freedom and all that is good and just in our world. Thank you, good night, and God bless America.
President Bush speaking live from the Oval Office in the White House. Perhaps ominously, among the things the President said was, and this is not a direct quote, but it's on the money, we will not differentiate between those who committed these acts today and those who harbored them. The President vowed that no act of terror will darken America's beacon of freedom. We go down to CBS News Chief White House Correspondent John Roberts. John?
Dan, important words for the President to say that we will not differentiate between the terrorists who committed this act and those who harbor them. If this was, in fact, Osama bin Laden's group who was behind this, that message is aimed directly at the Taliban government. Though we should point out, Dan, that every indication we get from the White House tonight is that the explosions that we saw in Kabul tonight were not part of any American action. The White House has absolutely disavowed any connection to those, as has the Defense Department. The President also sending out some important words of reassurance tonight to Americans, saying that the government is still in operation, essential personnel will be back at work later on tonight, and that the government will be open for business tomorrow. And even though the stock market will be closed tomorrow, Dan, the President reassuring Americans, saying that the American economy will be open for business. The big message here tonight that the President was trying to send out was the idea that they can hit us, but they can't knock us down. He said that we have stared enemies in the face before, we have stared them down, and we will do this again. So the president, Dan, tonight, using every ounce of resolve that he can muster to say the United States will recover from this enormous tragedy. Dan?
John Roberts at the White House. Now, U.S. officials are starting to piece together the case of what happened today, and in some instances they're piecing together what they see as links to Osama bin Laden for being responsible for the worst terrorist attack in U.S. history. That Orrin Hatch, the top Republican on the Senate Judiciary Committee tonight, said they, meaning intelligence operations, they have an intercept of some information that included people associated with bin Laden who acknowledged a couple of targets were hit. That's a direct quote from Senator Hatch. He went on to say that law enforcement has data possibly linking one person on one of the 4 ill-fated flights to bin Laden's organization. Now, government and industry officials say at least one flight attendant and 2 passengers called from 3 of the planes as they were being forced down in New York and Washington, each describing similar circumstances. The callers indicated the hijackers were, at least in the beginning, armed with knives. This day's horrific events began with the familiar turbine whine of jet engines over New York. But this Boeing 767 was too low and not in the regular flight pattern. It was aimed straight for the massive twin towers of the World Trade Center. It hit it. CBS's Byron Pitts is on the scene tonight. Byron?
Well, Dan, a few moments ago, a producer for 60 Minutes just walked back from the crime scene and said she counted only 4 floors left, 4 stories left of one of the 110-story towers. At this hour, rescue teams are still waiting, still hoping, still praying they will find survivors alive. Without exaggeration, Ground Zero looks like a battlefield. 8:48 a.m., mayhem in Manhattan.
We saw a plane coming very low, and everyone said, wow, that plane is very, very low.
Come on, guys, keep moving.
I was walking to work, and all of a sudden, I see a jet crash into the first tower.
An American Airlines flight loaded with 92 people crashes head-on into the North Tower of the World Trade Center.
And then we heard the crash. We ran to the window.
Into the building. It went into the Trade Center.
We hit the Trade Center. We saw the shrapnel fall, and then we said, get out.
And minutes later.
There's another one. Another plane just hit. Right. Oh, my God. Another plane has just hit.
I heard a roar, and I looked around thinking that it had to be a helicopter, and I looked up, and I saw the second plane hit.
A second commercial plane, a United Airlines jet, also hijacked, carrying 65 people, plows into the South Tower.
First one we thought was an accident. When we heard there was a second one, we definitely thought it was terrorism.
On the ground, witnesses could not believe their eyes. 70 stories up with the building burning, reason gave way to desperation. New York's bravest never had a chance.
We really never even got to that close to the building. The explosion blew and it knocked everybody over.
Less than an hour later, the South Tower came crumbling down.
It collapsed. The top floors collapsed down. I saw it blow and then ran like hell. Thank God. I'm 69, but I can still run.
But it was far from over.
Tower 2 collapsed into Tower 1. Within minutes after that, we were ordered out.
When the dust settled, signs of life started to emerge.
Chaos. It's just chaos out here. It really is. So the Twin Towers fall. It's amazing. It's crazy. I can't believe this shit is happening. I really can't. It's nightmares. Armageddon right here.
This was the worst act of terrorism on U.S. soil, but not the first attack on the World Trade Center. 8 years ago, terrorists set off bombs in the basement in an effort to take down the 2 towers. They failed. Today, mission accomplished.
I tell you what, it's a sad day for America. It really is.
By 2 o'clock this afternoon, firefighters and police officers and paramedics by the hundreds stood by, many of them feeling helpless. There was nothing they could do at this point because the building was still unsecured.
Our main priority is to get in, do a search and rescue, look for survivors, and then clean up what's left. And we can't do that until the building is deemed safe.
Ankle deep in debris and despair, rescue workers waited. Some had relatives of their own inside. One police officer told me her sister worked here on the 40th floor due in at 9 a.m. She was always early, she said. Always. A sign on a paramedic's van spoke volumes.
We know we have some of the major brass of our department missing. We're trying to find them, too.
New York Port Authority Police Chief William Hall choked back tears. For him, this was no longer just work. On a personal level, because I know that these are all your men and it's a business, but I'm sure that a lot of these guys are your friends. How you helping
Not
them?
a business now, it's personal now.
Sir?
It's personal now. We have to get them.
Back live, we have had little relief here. Take a look at this. Hours ago, World Trade Center building number 7 collapsed, a 42-story building that crumbled hours after the initial devastation. It was the one calamity here that was not a surprise. Police had evacuated the area earlier, fearful building number 7 would indeed fall down. Minutes after the second tower collapsed, we met a firefighter named Tim McGee, a New York City firefighter. He was covered in soot from the top of his helmet to the bottom of his feet. He was crying. He told me that he had lost all of his men when the building collapsed. He asked us to reach his wife, Maria, tell her that he was okay, that he had survived. Quote, tell her, I love her. Dan.
Byron Pitts in Lower Manhattan. Mind you that the World Trade Center complex has 7 buildings. So the Twin Towers went down, they're the big ones, but then the 47-story World Trade Center building number 7 collapsed. That was near the end of Byron Pitts' report. Now, building 5 in the World Trade Center complex was for many hours today described as on the brink of collapse. The state of that building at this hour is uncertain. It was long ago evacuated completely. Now about today's other terror strike at the seat and symbol of U.S. military might, the U.S. Defense Department, the Pentagon, first opened in 1943, never before directly attacked. There were 64 people aboard American Flight 77, the jetliner hijackers used to ram into the Pentagon. CBS's David Martin reports the deadly impact there. David?
Dan, fires are still burning, but Pentagon officials say the flames are under control and the Pentagon will be open for business tomorrow. But Defense Secretary Rumsfeld had a grim warning that casualties will be high.
Some people have been lifted out and taken away in ambulances, and the numbers will be calculated, and it will not be a few.
The first attack ever on the Pentagon occurred at 9:38 a.m. Eastern Time.
Clipped this pole over here, hit another pole and slammed right into the building. Huge explosion, and then utter pandemonium, as you might imagine. I mean, everybody was screaming, oh my God.
A hijacked American Airlines jet, which had just taken off from Dulles Airport, flew right up the main highway leading north into Washington and straight into the citadel of American military power.
There was no doubt about it. It was American Airlines slammed right into the building, and there was no doubt about it. Whoever was piloting that plane was aiming for the Pentagon.
Fearful that, like the World Trade Center, a second airliner was on its way, most of the building's 23,000 workers fled.
Plane's coming in. Come on. Let's go. Let's go. Come on. We're not playing around here. Let's go.
F-16 fighters circled overhead looking for a second attack, but the damage had already been done. The plane had drilled a hole about a third of the way through the world's largest office building. The wounded were rushed to nearby hospitals as the fire spread and an entire section of the building collapsed, trapping many, many more inside.
Arlington search and rescue personnel are just now, and it's about almost 2 o'clock, just now gaining access to portions of the building where the plane hit because the fires were too intense.
One ray of hope. The Pentagon is undergoing a major renovation, and some of the offices in the path of the plane were vacant.
We're trying to find out who made it out okay and account for the people that may not have made it out.
When the plane hit, Defense Secretary Rumsfeld moved from his office on the other side of the building into the National Military Command Center in the basement. With smoke hanging in the air, he ordered aircraft carriers, amphibious ships, cruisers, and destroyers to New York and Washington, where they can serve as floating hospitals, help with the cleanup, and provide air defense against the possibility of more attacks. And the chairman of the Joint Chiefs made a clear threat of military retaliation.
I have no intentions of discussing today what comes next, but make no mistake about it, your armed forces are ready.
Right now, suspicion focuses on Osama bin Laden, and we have some new pictures of this damage done to the Pentagon by whoever these terrorists were. First, really close-up pictures of the damage. I'm looking at it for the first time with you. I do not see any evidence there of the fuselage of the plane. Those are corridors I've walked down thousands of times, and right now they're unrecognizable. Back to you, Dan.
David Martin reporting live again from the Pentagon. New York City Mayor Rudolph Giuliani has confirmed that some of the first police officers and firefighters on the scene were killed. And the mayor added that in general, quote, the number of casualties will be more than most of us can bear. Mike Carter, vice president of the Firefighters Union here in New York City, estimates that half of the 400 firefighters who first reached the scene may, I underline that word, may be dead. I quote Mike Carter of the Firefighters Union. We have entire companies that are just missing. We lost chiefs. We're going to have to bury a lot of people, Carter said. Roman Catholic Church Cardinal Edward Egan, who administered last rites to dozens of victims, said that the firefighters and police were, quote, dead in great numbers, quote unquote, the Cardinal. Police Department and union sources, speaking on condition of anonymity, said that 78 police officers were missing. However, Assistant Chief Tom Fahey said the number of known missing among police officers is not that high. The emergency medical service worker, Luis Garcia, said initial reports indicated that bodies were buried beneath the 2 feet at least of soot on streets around the Trade Center. And Garcia said a lot of vehicles are running over bodies because bodies are all over the place. Garcia is a 15-year veteran who had 2 people die in his ambulance on the way to the hospital. That gives you some of the mood, the atmosphere, and some of the facts and eyewitness reports that surround us here in New York City tonight. Now, to punish those behind today's attacks, the U.S. must first and foremost determine who there are. There's been much